So Alan asked me if I could just touch on some of the issues with respect to Pompe disease. And of course, all of us want to know how we can reduce the risk of us catching COVID-19, but also reduce the impact if we do get it. Because, you know, those of you who've been shielding will understand only too well the reasons why having weak respiratory muscles does not put you in a good place to deal with a chest infection. There are also gut effects of coronavirus, COVID-19, because the virus does also, it enters through the nose, it enters through the receptors also in the lungs and also in the gut. And in Pompe, you already got potentially activation of inflammatory pathways. And then if you get a viral infection on top of that, that's only going to get worse. Generalized weakness and disability. What we know about COVID-19 is it does appear to be a very catabolic illness, even in people who don't make it to hospital, because the inflammation tends to force muscle to be burned as a fuel, because the inflammation can interfere with fat being burned for energy. And so obviously if you've already got weak muscle function, this is something to be concerned about. And again, specific micronutrients, because a number of them are known to have important effects on the immune system. And vitamin D we've talked about, and obviously physical inactivity, because this virus does seem to cause significant loss of lean muscle, lean tissue. This is a concern, and what it does, what we know about visceral fat in Pompe is not known, but suspected to be increased. And the issue is that when we've looked, even the early data from China that we had back in January, February, the publications were coming out, did suggest that people who had the so-called metabolic syndrome, the hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, seem to be at substantially increased risk of COVID-19. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the mechanisms. Next slide. This is a colourful and busy slide, but just and I'll talk my way through it, is this wretched virus uses a receptor, a gateway on the cells called the ACE2 receptor. And that's the way it gets into the cells. So these ACE2 receptors are involved in taste, which is why people can get loss of taste if they get the COVID-19 infection. These ACE2 receptors, so they're in the nose in particular, and also in the brain, in the lungs, in the gut. And actually, when I've done some further reading, ACE2 receptors seem to be found in areas of inflammation, which then may explain some of the more unusual patterns. Now, the other thing is that the viruses generally can be considered intracellular hijackers. So the virus can't replicate outside a cell. It has to get inside a cell and exploit the machinery. And it does that. And so when it gets into the ACE2 receptor, it then just hijacks the cell machinery for replicating the virus, consumes nutrients that the cell otherwise needs for general functioning, and completely knocks out the rest of the ACE2 receptor pathway. And well, what's the ACE2 receptor pathway? Well, you know, quite a few of you may be familiar with a class of blood pressure medicines called ACE inhibitors, and that's the ACE1 receptor, ACE1 system. ACE1 and ACE2, they are part of a balancing act. And if you like, the ACE2 system is like your natural inhibitor of your ACE1 pathway. If you got the angiotensin 1 pathway activated, this will trigger high blood pressure, it will trigger inflammation, it will trigger blood clotting, and it will also trigger fluid retention. And so this is, and then it leads to the cytokine, so-called cytokine storm. So it is a really quite a nasty it's a nasty mechanism of action, and then it really triggers a whole lot of cell pathways that can do quite widespread damage. Next slide. So, so from a nutritional point of view, what can we do? I mean, obviously, if we don't want to catch a virus, the best thing is to obviously not get it in the first place. But some of us, are exposed or may be exposed. So anything that we can do to reduce the chance of us either catching the virus or getting a severe form of the virus should ultimately improve outcome. So as I mentioned before, innate immune, it's like your inborn immunity. And vitamin D is certainly a big player there. But vitamin A is important for maintaining immunity. There's years and years, about 30 years ago, the WHO found that by giving a single high-dose vitamin A supplement to children in developing countries, they could reduce the death rates from measles massively. These are in kids who hadn't even been immunized. But it's an example of how nutrition can really support immune function. And you need enough zinc to carry vitamin A around in the body. Zinc is important for taste, utilization of protein, all sorts of things. And vitamin C has been looked at. It's an antioxidant as well, and that is a separate question. So, and I'll talk a bit more later. So, a number of nutrients, but I would emphasize, obviously, zinc is important. Vitamin D is important. Iron is also important. Vitamin A is generally adequate in our society. But if people are on very low-fat diets or people are zinc deficient, then there may be still low levels of vitamin A. Vitamin C has a wide range of roles. Selenium is fascinating. Selenium is as a trace mineral, and it is really important for antioxidant production. It's possibly important for fatty acid oxidation as well, and that's an area of, emerging research. But there's a huge body of work that shows selenium deficiency can make protects the cell from the virus mutating. So viruses do mutate, and we know that COVID-19 has mutated, but the virus is more likely to mutate into a nastier form if the person who's carrying the virus is deficient in selenium. So that's why, poverty and malnutrition all around the world actually should be everybody's concern. It's not good enough for those of us in rich countries to say we're all right. Actually, it'll come to bite us, even if people view it from the most selfish point of view. Then a number of nutrients are important in some of the specific functions of the immune system as well. And cell-mediated immunity can be important for virus as well as, viruses as well. So, once you expose the virus, then nutrients can also modify that response. So you do want an active immune system, but the other thing is you want it to be good enough, but you don't want an overactive immune system, because some of the worst outcomes of COVID-19 appear to occur when you get an uncontrolled inflammatory response. Next slide. So this slide shows again, just in the bottom right, these so-called inflammatory cytokines. You may have heard about the cytokine storm. So it's when that gets activated that you end up with real trouble. Now, a few things about the ACE system. Next slide, please. So the renin-angiotensin system, if you have uncontrolled action of this, you can get severe lung injury. You get insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. And it's important that in those conditions, you already have an imbalance of the ACE1 system. There are effects on blood pressure, there are effects on fluid retaining hormones, effects on fibrosis and inflammation. And there is emerging literature that the kind of fat that people develop around the middle, which is associated with insulin resistance and diabetes and high blood pressure, that is associated with more activity of the renin-angiotensin system. And so it is sort of a double vulnerability. And so how can you modify that? Obviously, if people who can exercise whatever you can within your limits, anything you can do is beneficial. And then also avoid overloading the system. So avoid over nutrition as well. The other thing that's worth mentioning, and I don't have it in a slide form, is that in terms of data on COVID, there've been a few things which have come out. In children are not affected as a general rule in the same way as adults, and it does relate to some extent to their physiology, their immune system. Women are less affected than men, and that's because the renin-angiotensin system, the ACE1 system, is more active in men than women. It's estrogen driven, and the experimental data to show that you can influence that by overectomize or adding or taking away estrogen. So there is definitely an hormonal influence, and many of the other things that come into play. Next slide, please. I think that should be my last one. So what can you do? I think the message is, beyond whatever specific treatments and what supportive treatments you're having for Pompe, it's really important to just look after general health. Everything you do does make a difference. And, the Mediterranean style diet, which we've discussed about potentially having even a direct role in attenuating the complications of Pompe, also is very rich in antioxidants. And the last thing I haven't said about COVID or emphasized is that when you have this cytokine storm, there is an incredible depletion of antioxidants. So you actually do, and when you get that happen, you get more cell damage. So Mediterranean diet is very rich in natural plant compounds that have protective effects. We don't yet have a vaccine. It is in development, and the Oxford vaccine is showing promising phase 1 trial, but those of you who know all about clinical trials know it's only early. So I think we have to do everything we can to stay as well as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gisela. That was incredible. A very comprehensive presentation.